Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip. Quick, before we get attacked by our arch enemy. Sentient claw machines.
Welcome to the city, spelled C-I-T-T-E to some people's annoyance. Capital city of the nation of Amber, spelled like hombre without the H, yet the citizens aren't called hombres. Some may consider that a missed opportunity. It's a place of magic, wonder, songs and shadows, haves and have-nots. The haves maintain power through the use of masquerades that contain the magic and grant them elemental powers, which in turn leads to opportunity, which translates to money and power. And these masquerades are in limited supply, and they don't know how to make more of them. That's the root of the friction. The rest of the population are made up of the contendani, the maskless, and they tend to struggle to survive. So backdrop of political tension established, and we play as Cicero, ex-inspectore of the city, and brother of the late leader of the contendani resistance. And we've been called back from exile to find an old friend who went missing during an important mission for the government, with far-reaching consequences for their society and concealed importance yet to be discovered. Epic purpose established. Visually, the game does have its niceties. The Renaissance stylings and masquerade theme is nice. The detailing on those masks. Look at those capes and how Cicero's palming his sword. Not exactly the most peaceful gesture for someone trying to maintain a low profile. They didn't go all the way. I mean, where are the gondolas? I mean, there's a water faction. They could have traveled by waterbending. The game sort of employs a kind of cell shading, and the bright, element-specific color coding is rather lovely. It likes a geometric pattern, sometimes quite small, detailed ones, but sometimes the game can have a generic, plain or barren quality to it, where there are open areas with very few features, little variation in texture,
At least on the walls.
or even when those detailed patterns are used, but in an incredibly uniform, repeating fashion. Well, these roof tiles are tidy.
A tad sterile and clean for a city that's this seedy. I mean, this place is rather pretty for an area just referred to as back alley. But some areas, I suppose, can look a bit more dingy. And there's a small issue in that some of the elements can even look a bit blurry. See in this room the plants, the more detailed items like papers on tables, the detailing on the desk, stuff like that. With their style of hand drawing, there's a bit of smudge, plays havoc with the finer details.
But other times it can look lovely. Now this is the right amount of lavish. I don't care if it's mostly carpet.
This is a lovely, glowy, subterranean area.
This is a lovely garden. And this is a nice busy dock, if the people aren't moving around that much. And most cutscenes involve cards being stacked and overlain, moved about in a dynamic comic book fashion. In Masquerada, the comic cutscenes work better than usual, and speech during general gameplay is displayed with 3D models in a Warcraft-free fashion. And while they are limited in range, they do display enough emotion, and both these elements are elevated by some quality, extensive, expressive, yet subtle at times, voice acting.
Calden. Songs unsung. Now you understand. I'm afraid I do.
You could argue that this was a focus of the game, because it's an awfully obscure indie title to have as big a name as Jennifer Hale attached to it.
And even if I did, what then? We are but single entities, Cyrus. How much can one person hope to achieve?
And according to an online search, some of the rest of this list is pretty stacked too as voice acting goes. It's not perfect. They really go all in with their fancy talk, and there may be one or two other issues, like enjoying a mannered pause.
I am not made of stone. I have a heart. But it goes out to my kin and blood before their murderers. And if performing my duties requires me to step over your ideals, I am sorry.
Some people might think that's ham adjacent at least. I liked it. Follows quality.
And the music is great. Maybe not stick in your head great, but it has sweet, somber tracks. Hinting at incredibly cautious optimism. Soft and lilting, and dour, serious, almost sinister operatic singing. plus the general combat track that makes use of these instruments at a rather brisk pace. Just listen to this furious flute, followed by a heavy transition. Come to think about it, I played this quite some time ago, and one or two of these tracks I still remember. But gameplay-wise, the game is rather light. It's essentially an isometric action RPG that's perhaps not as smooth and a bit more loose. Sure, you can purchase skills and upgrade them with skill points, recruit a bunch of different people and have a party, and you can pause for tactics. But on the difficulty I played, it really wasn't necessary for me to think or play tactically. I rarely died, there aren't character stat sheets, so you don't min-max. You can't customize your character, and there's no money to purchase equipment. You can just choose from the skills I mentioned, depending on what element you chose, and pick from a few discoverable masks that offer different ultimate abilities.
Oh, you can be Sub-Zero?
And lastly, you can choose from some discoverable ink and engravings that add a chance of benefits being applied to your strikes. It's not very deep. When in doubt, flank, use your powers, and choose upgrades that improve them in the way you want. Okay, I'm going to summon elemental clones that increase my focus with each strike, and then I'll use that focus to hammer the enemy with
Damage.
Ultimately, very simple and straightforward, and not exactly the most satisfying combat feeling, because it didn't really feel like I was destroying them, connecting, hurting them.
It's heating up!
And the journey is very linear as well. At best you can discover the masks and ink I mentioned, but arguably the best thing you can find are codex entries. Don't make that noise. In my opinion, the game's story is its best feature. It's the draw. Plus it has pretty good world building. A unique world made from scratch described in detail. But I suppose the plot isn't the standout here. It's more of the characters, their emotions and
Baggage.
And unsurprisingly, good quality voice acting helps here. It's a lovely thing, Cicero's journey towards redemption, learning how to care again, and his interactions with his team are great. And the codex I mentioned is great, if for no other reason than it's written Cicero's voice. And he's very generous and understanding towards the subjects he talks about, probably because he himself was part of the elite of the city and knew how hard it was to go against them. He knows what it feels like to feel trapped in a morally compromised position, and is thus kind to others in turn. Focuses on the positive, plus he's an astute inspector with a flair for reason and practicality. Kind of a caring, fatherly figure, yet not
Perfect.
arguably a tad unique as a character for his understanding. Maybe he's even nuanced, at least to an extent. He even loses it at times, but by and large, kind dad. But as great as this is, it does make some wrong turns on occasion. For instance, at times Cicero does resist vulnerability and getting attached, but then almost at the drop of a hat sticks his nose into his companion's business. More than once. The most profound bits probably are found in the codex, so you will have to read those, and there's a lot of it. But it's lovely and aids the overall storytelling. But all told, if you read all of that and savor the story, there's probably more story than gameplay here. It is a story-based game. I mean, I do meander when I read in a game, I'm quite sluggish, but still, if you read all of it, it's a lot to swallow. And this probably means the hour total for you will be a bit less, but it took me 25 hours to complete the game. And it is cheap on Steam, 130 Rand full price, 32 Rand 50 on sale. That's 1 Rand 30 per hour of gameplay, which is splendid. But to download it is kind of big, as it takes up 11.03 gigabytes on the hard drive. And it isn't the easiest to run. It does work on the Warhorse, but it does lag quite a bit. At the very least shows heavy frame rate drop, not the most playable in this state, but if you turn down the resolution to 800 by 600, fastest graphics, unwindowed with VSync off, it does become playable. You can get between 24 and 29 FPS during cutscenes, between 38 and 42 frames per second during general talk, and surprisingly it seems to do better during combat. During the first two tutorial fights, I saw between 40 and 52 FPS. But you're the specifications, you make the call. The visuals do take a hit when you turn things down like this, as not stable, but arguably it's playable on the Warhorse. Stereotypically, it's not the kid-friendliest game. Violence isn't really gratuitous. At worst you may see a pool of blood. I think there's a moment in the game where a baby dies. And I believe you interact with a situation that involves forced child sex work. And the game does have some grim musings and prejudice, not just against people without masks. The city is largely a non-religious place, so they place a lot of emphasis on having children. And subsequently, homosexuality is taboo here. And one of your companions, Calden, is intimately involved in that plot point. At one point, Cicero actually advises him to hide his sexuality, more out of practical protection reasons than disapproval. And spoiler alert, later you do help Calden in this realm, but this is in the game, and this may irk some people because sometimes, especially in fantasy games, this kind of prejudice doesn't exist at all. And don't get me wrong, that can be great, but maybe sometimes having it in a game can be nice and be a more honest comparison to real life. Even if the resolution I mentioned Cicero helped achieve was a tad easy and clean. But Calden is a great character, sweet, and at times the situation was brutal, such as when Cicero was unsure how to react when he found out. So that's how the game handles it. Input that into your moral compass. The visuals are nice, cel shading, hand-drawn backgrounds, better than average comic cutscenes, and thumbnail facial animations, if they're limited in emotional range. Some areas can look a bit too clean, lacking in texture, especially for such a dark city, and sometimes the areas can be a tad lifeless, but overall good, as some places look great, and the intricate details on those masquerades is lovely. It is great music, maybe not the most memorable, but it has lovely operatic touches, lilting tunes for the more calm times, and a kind of heart-racing combat track. It's just somehow maybe a bit low profile. It has great voice acting that breathes life into the entire game, quite extensive. It doesn't handle the codex, so you have to read that, but otherwise nice. It has a very good story, the plot is okay, the world building good interactions with the characters, and the internal monologue from Cicero in the codex is brilliant. And that's where the most profound things will probably be found, in him seeing the best in everyone, but in a reasonable way. Cicero's a very good, morally compromised character, but it does have its missteps. Sometimes Cicero will behave irrationally, sometimes it feels like dialogue is delayed, and there may be some obvious reveals. On the maybe side, this is a story-based game. It's the main draw, it's most of what the game is. As said, you read a lot because the codex has no voiceover, just be aware. On the con side, the gameplay isn't great. On normal difficulty, it doesn't require much tactical thought. Perhaps it's harsh to put this as a con, maybe it's fine. It's busy work adjacent. The systems aren't particularly deep, it's very linear, finding the engravings and ink isn't that hard. Maybe I'm being harsh because I really like this game and was looking for a con. The combat and exploration can be fun if it's very simple, and it does break up the story so that you're not just watching a movie. But warning, once again, it's a story-based game, definitely. The ability to appreciate the game for its story is a prerequisite to buying it. Come on, play this incredibly serious game about masks. Don't worry, at one point Jim Carrey arrives to make things a bit more lighthearted. Smoking.
Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.